Marge, that includes you. All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming this morning. I think we have some good information to digest this morning, and want to welcome the director, Matt Gress, here this morning, and the staff from Governor Ducey's staff as well. This morning, I think we're going to have take a few minutes and kind of go over this presentation. This is the governor's budget presentation, and I think there's some good stuff in there for Pinal County, which is exciting to see and get called out. It's been a while since I saw Pinal County actually identified in the governor's budget, so this is a good thing. And obviously recognizing the importance of our county. And thank you all for being here this morning. I know that we have several elected officials. In fact, if I can have all the elected officials stand up, our council members, there you go, thank you. County supervisors, thank you guys for coming down, appreciate it. And then really, I don't have a whole lot of things to say this morning other than to welcome everybody, and I'm going to hand it off to Becky Freeman, who is the also director from the governor's office. Becky, you want to say a few words and then introduce your folks. All right, so it's all yours. There's this.
Perfect. Wonderful. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thank you so much to the city for hosting us this morning. We're thrilled to be here and take the budget on the road. And also would like to thank Pinal Partnership. Thank you for helping promote today's event and all the others who got the word out. It's wonderful to see you all this morning here with us. I'm going to turn it over to Trista, but just wanted to say good morning. Thank you for having us. Trista is our Director of Constituent Services, and then we'll get into the program. So thank you so much.
And I'm just going to take a moment of your time to let you know what services our office provides. We have a staff that's able to help with any constituent issues at the state level. If it's not something that we can handle at the state level, we try to facilitate warm handoffs to federal or local partners. So you can reach our office for any issues that you might have or just comments or concerns. We're at engage@az.gov. And our phone number is 602-542-4331. So feel free to reach out to us anytime. And I'm going to hand it over to Matt Gress now, who's going to get into the numbers.
Thanks, Trista. She's been quite a trooper traveling with us. Yesterday we were in Prescott and Flagstaff, and that was her first time flying in Arizona on one of our smaller planes to get up there, and so she made it through, and we'll be in Yuma. Okay, everyone was okay, and we'll be in Yuma and Kingman on Friday. So we're getting out to share the news. There is a lot of good news to share about our state's fiscal position now, and so we'll get into that. So on November 6th, 1.3 million Arizonans, 56% of the votes cast, re-elected Governor Ducey to a new 4-year term in office. And they made two priorities crystal clear, that they want their teachers paid and their budgets balanced. And the 2020 executive budget does that. So over the next hour or so, we'll give you a view of the national and state economies from our perspective and their impact on the state's general fund collections. And then we'll move into current year supplemental funding. When we pass a budget, as they say at the Capitol, it's out of date the day after it's passed. Things that you expected to happen might not fully develop as you thought, and so we have to make adjustments, and we'll talk about a few of those. Then we'll get into the current budget priorities, including some special investments that do affect Pinal County. There were several items, in fact, in the budget that affect Pinal County. And we'll wrap up with any questions that you might have or comments that you'd like us to take back to Phoenix. So from the economic perspective, on the national level, things have never looked better. We're expecting our gross domestic product growth rate for calendar year 2018 to exceed 3%. That's the overall growth of our economy. We haven't seen that kind of growth rate since before the Great Recession. From a labor perspective, we're approaching 50-year lows in terms of our unemployment rate. So a lot of good news there. But we have to be cautious in the out years. We know that really jagged blue line represents the S&P 500. Wall Street is jittery. I'm sure if you have a retirement account or any money market, you get on and you're like, wow, I'm down, and then the next day I'm up, and so daily prognostication might not be as helpful, but you can see a long-term trend where we saw a major ramp up in the stock market, and then after we saw rate hikes, interest rate hikes from the Federal Reserve Board, that really spooked investors on Wall Street, and you saw that huge decline in the last month of calendar year 2018. So then the Federal Reserve Board came back and said, well, we do have 2 more interest rate hikes planned for 2019, but we might back away from that given the jitterness of Wall Street, which then caused Wall Street to return back to the stock market, and so it's just been this seesaw effect. But what it tells us is that things are not as firm as we would prefer in the out years. So we're going to see a good 2019, but the out years are a little more hazy. It's also worth noting that in 6 months from now, we will have achieved the longest period of uninterrupted economic expansion since World War II. So there are business cycles, and it appears that if history is an indicator that we're nearing the end of the business cycle, but when that end finally occurs is yet to be seen. So the Federal Reserve has revised upward their unemployment rate projections in the out years, but they're still pretty low. They've revised downward their gross domestic product growth rates, but they're still pretty good. And for Arizona, right now we are riding high on that national momentum. First in the nation in construction job growth, second in manufacturing job growth, and you know that better than most other counties in Arizona, that kind of economic activity is happening here in Pinal County, and with passage of the water bill, hopefully on Thursday, we can continue to move full steam ahead here in Pinal County. Third, in net in-migration. The governor always likes to say that people vote with their feet, and they're voting to come to Arizona. We were the 4th fastest growing state in the country last year, and when people come to Arizona, they're finding opportunity. For the 4th month in a row, we are seeing job growth in the state of Arizona in excess of 3%. That is the longest streak of sustained job growth since before the Great Recession. And this continues that labor market narrative. The red line represents total employment. We're at all-time highs, sustained by that streak of 3% job growth each month for the last half of calendar year 2018. The blue curve represents unemployment. We're at 10-year lows. So good news from that perspective. And as it relates to the general fund, things are looking up. Through November, where we have finalized actuals, we are up $175 million compared to what we had expected when we passed the budget last May. So not only will we reach our revenue forecast for fiscal year 19, which is the current fiscal year we are in, but we'll probably exceed that. And as such, we're revising our growth rates up. Now, in fiscal year 2018, we had a really great year. 7.1% year-over-year revenue growth. That means the general fund grew by 7.1% in fiscal year 2018 over fiscal year 2017. Now, what does that mean? Well, in context, the 10-year post-recession growth rate average for the state's general fund was 3.2%. So we did incredibly well in 2018. We're doing very well in 2019, and so we're revising our growth rate up to 6.8%. But as you can see in the out years, we're in the low 3s because we're adding caution to our out year forecast because of uncertainty, and we're trying to reflect that longer run average that we've experienced since the Great Recession. This is an interesting chart. This is kind of the first look before we consider executive initiatives. So how much money is available for us to spend, save, or do whatever. And we have to keep in mind that we were upside down 10 years ago by $3 billion. And that's what those two lines represent. The red line represents spending commitments. The blue line represents what we had in revenue. And we were upside down. We had more spending commitments to the tune of $3 billion than we had revenue. So we had to cut $1 billion. We had to mortgage our state capital and other assets for about another $1 billion. And we had to do the temporary sales tax, 1 cent sales tax that you might recall, that generated $1 billion to get out of that. In 2017, we became structurally balanced for the first time since 2007. It took a lot of hard work, tough decisions, smart planning, but as a result, you can see in the table below the projected cash balance, how much we expect to have in cash in our bank account by the end of fiscal year 2020, this upcoming fiscal year, $1.1 billion. $1.1 billion. 4 years ago, when the governor took office, we were facing a projected deficit of $1 billion, and now we're in a really good spot. But we have to ensure that we don't commit the mistakes of the past where we had spending out of control. You can see in the mid-2000s, when we experienced a huge boom in our economy, year-over-year growth in spending, and I'm sure the elected officials who have to vote on budgets can appreciate this, but in 2006, nearly 20% growth in year-over-year spending. Now, if you look back over the prior 25 years, the average spending growth rate was between 3.5% and 4%. 20% year over year. And we know how the story ended because we didn't have enough revenues to take care of most of those ongoing commitments, and we had to slash and burn, hurting a lot of stakeholders. So that is fresh on our minds as we're trying to consider what to do with the $1 billion that we have right now. You can see in the first 3 years of the governor's term, relatively tame spending growth rates in the twos. Last year we had 6.3%, 6.4% growth rate, fueled in large part by the teacher pay raise package and other reversals of cuts to K-12 education. And we're at 9.2% in 2020. So it is higher compared to the other budgets that we've signed, but a majority of that would be targeted one-time investments, which is very different than what we did in the mid-2000s. And the 5-year growth rate is still at 4.5%, so it's closer to that long-run average of spending growth. So we think that this is fiscally responsible. But one way to hedge against that uncertainty in the out years, not only by ensuring that we're not overcommitting ourselves in terms of spending growth, but we need to save. And we know that we're not saving enough. Financial experts say that we should have between 10 to 15% of our annual revenues in our savings account, which we call the rainy day fund. We have a little over 5%. So we are far away from that. And as a result, the governor is putting in a $542 million general fund deposit into the rainy day fund, bringing it up from about $450 million to $1 billion. This will be the single largest deposit we've ever made in the state's rainy day fund history when it was created in 1991. And it would also represent the largest balance as a percentage of general fund revenues. It would be at 9% since the fund was created. We've experienced 2 recessions and we've used, since 1991, we've experienced 2 recessions. And you can see that, I don't know if there's not a laser pointer on there, but you can see we've completely drained the cash as represented by those blue bars. We completely emptied the account after both recessions. So we know that we're not saving enough at the current level, and we're not prepared for a recession when you look at where the fund balance was in the last 2 cases. So we have more work to do here, and this is an important step. We're also regaining ownership of many of those assets that we mortgaged in 2010 to take care of one of the $1 billion that I mentioned when we were upside down. as a result of being very fiscally prudent, being aggressive with our debt repayment, we now have about $900 million left in debt that we owe. And as a result of having a smaller principal, we're in a lower interest rate environment. We have a shorter term. It's a 10-year term instead of a 20-year term. And our credit rating has improved significantly since 2010. We're able to refinance and save over $100 million between 2020 and 2030 while getting back our state capitol, the House and the Senate, the courts, the executive tower, the governor offices. So this is a huge step in the right direction, and we're projecting to pay off of all of the general fund supported debt. 80% will be retired over the next 10 years because we're committed to not issuing new debt and aggressively paying off our existing responsibilities. Here's some supplemental funding, the $55 million for the current year. We have some school facilities board building renewal grants. This is a state agency that either builds new schools for our districts or helps repair things such as air conditioners, roofs, things like that. We have more requests coming in than we anticipated, so we're fully funding that, and I'll mention it later on in the presentation as well. There's another piece here that I think is very of high interest to Pinal County, and that's our agriculture infrastructure component that we have in the current fiscal year. And that, you may have heard, is part of the drought contingency plan / water package that's moving through the legislature and will likely see a floor vote tomorrow. So we're including $5 million that will help agriculture infrastructure. And this is essentially drilling wells for groundwater purposes. So moving into our budget priorities, as I mentioned earlier, we have a projected $1 billion cash balance. We're proposing to save half of it, put it in the rainy day fund, so we can prepare for the uncertainty in 2021 and 2022. And then we commit the other half to executive initiatives, of which a majority is one time, $538 million. So just here's a snapshot of where that new spending is going. If you look at just the executive initiatives, that $538 million, half of it's going to education. If you looked at the executive initiatives plus our underlying baseline spending, it's similar to your utility bill. You're always going to get it. It's part of your monthly expenses. It'll reoccur next month and the month after that. It's the same situation here. Enrollment growth in our K-12 school system. We have healthcare costs. We have other formula programs, as well as the teacher pay raise package. So if you include all of the baseline and the executive initiatives, 70% is going to education, K-12 and higher ed. So we're really proud about that. So where does that leave us from a structural and a cash balance? When you include the executive initiatives and our rainy day fund proposal, you can see that the name of the game here and the top priority of the governor is that we have a balanced budget. In every year of our budget window, we have to budget in 3-year increments. And so the idea is that the solid blue bar should never be below the solid red bar, right? Because otherwise you would be upside down and structurally imbalanced. So we maintain structural balance throughout the budget window, and we have a ending cash balance of $109 million. So the $1 billion becomes $109 million at the end of fiscal year 2020 under the governor's proposed spending plan. And we maintain structural balance where we have more ongoing revenue than we have ongoing spending throughout that budget window. Just a couple of items that I'll quickly go through the government that works section. As a result of the public safety fee that was implemented last year by the legislature, we're now able to end the HERF sweeps that some of you may be familiar with. This is called the Highway User Revenue Fund that's supported by gasoline taxes. That was intended to be constitutionally directed to cities, counties, and the state for highway projects. It makes sense. You're paying gasoline to drive your cars on roads that you want to be maintained, and so it's similar to a user fee. Well, we were diverting a portion of that money, shorting cities and towns and our counties, as well as the state, to cover the costs of the highway patrol. With the public safety fee, that provides the highway patrol its own separate dedicated funding stream, which allows the HERF funding to be restored for our counties, cities, and the state and their transportation projects. One of those projects made possible by the public safety fee is the expansion and acceleration of the I-17 project. ADOT is planning to add a reversible lane between Sunset Point and Black Canyon City, or 2 reversible lanes to help ease congestion, and they were going to put 8 miles of a 3rd southbound lane between Black Canyon City and just north of New River. We're taking that southbound 3rd lane from New River all the way down to Anthem and adding a new 3rd northbound lane going from Anthem to Black Canyon City. That would not be possible under the current funding structure that ADOT has, so we're helping augment that. And this is one example of a project. I'm sure you can imagine there's another interstate near you that will likely be a beneficiary of the restored HERF dollars. So this is a really important investment that we want to highlight, and a sea change really in how we do infrastructure investment so that we can make them early on before it becomes too worse. And this is a preventative road surface maintenance also made possible. We're able to fund 100% now for the first time in history of our preventative road maintenance surface budget. And again, this is made possible with HERF restoration. We're investing in our broadband infrastructure. We know that there's certainly physical infrastructure we need to take care of, but our digital infrastructure is important as well. We're restoring $7 million in the Arizona Competes Fund. This is a grant program that many of you might be familiar with to help jumpstart businesses, particularly in our rural areas. And we're earmarking $3 million of that new $7 million to establish a new rural broadband grants program, as well as establishing, with using existing resources, a statewide broadband director who can marshal all of the varied stakeholders together to provide a cohesive plan moving forward on how to improve accessibility of broadband in Arizona. And again, going back to the public safety fee and the I-17 expansion, we're going to be including conduit, new conduit, on the I-17 corridor to help allow providers more access and putting more fiber into that conduit to get over Sunset Point, which is a huge constriction area in terms of infrastructure. We're continuing to provide financial relief for Arizona counties, including Pinal County. Last year, we included about $27 million in relief. We rolled back some of the cost sharing we forced counties to bear in the midst of the Great Recession, such as paying for costs to operate the Arizona State Hospital, operating the Department of Juvenile Corrections. There were some other items, the lottery distribution that counties used to receive, but then we took that money back in the Great Recession to help balance our budget. We returned that to them for their use. This year, we're continuing our efforts with permanently eliminating the Department of Juvenile Corrections cost share, as well as paying for half the cost of county Superior Court judges in Maricopa County. The state in every other county pays half of the cost for those judges, and so we're providing parity for Maricopa. This is a really cool investment. This is $700,000 to establish a new cold storage inspection facility at the Mariposa Port of Entry. That is our largest port in terms of international commerce going through there. And until the mid-2000s, it used to be the port that had the highest value of products going through, particularly temperature-sensitive goods, fruits, medicines, etc. But other ports, such as ports in Texas, had cold storage rooms for carriers to wait during secondary inspections. If a secondary inspection occurs for a carrier, it could take a few hours, could take a few days. And without a temperature-controlled room for those inspections to occur, you could lose millions of dollars in product. And so carriers have to plan out their trips, trying to mitigate risk as much as possible. And unfortunately, Mariposa has declined in terms of their competitiveness. This will be a huge move in the right direction to make Arizona more attractive, and that's going to result in more commerce coming through, hotel stays, fuel, food, etc., that we will benefit from. So to talk about the education section, I'm going to introduce Carlos Morgan. He's relatively new at our office, so this is kind of his debut, at least on behalf of OSPB. So he's going to mention some of the governor's education initiatives.
All right, as mentioned, my name is Carlos Morgan, and along with my colleague, we will be reviewing key K-12 and higher education initiatives and highlights from fiscal year 2020 executive budget. So the executive budget prioritizes funding for education. As mentioned earlier, 50% of initiatives and 70% of baseline plus initiative funding in fiscal year 2020 falls under K-12 and higher education. The majority of this $637 million increase in K-12 funding will be used for basic state aid to account for 0.8% enrollment growth and a 2% inflation adjustment and for school facilities. Other investments include expanding results-based funding, school safety initiatives, and creating a career and technical education incentive program. I will discuss several of these initiatives in later slides. The executive budget also includes $104 million in new funding for investments in higher education at Arizona's public universities and community colleges. In addition to $27 million for general operating and capital expenditures, the executive budget includes funding to expand the success of the Teachers Academy in developing the next generation of Arizona's teachers, support for the Aviation Center at Pima Community College, and enhancing resources for healthcare and technical education in Maricopa County Community College District. My colleague will review several of these initiatives in later slides. The executive budget delivers on the promise to provide more resources to Arizona's public K-12 education system by continuing implementation of the 20 by 2020 plan and continuing to phase in restoration of the additional assistance portion of formula funding to public schools. The fiscal year 2019 budget established a 5-year plan to restore $371 million suspended from basic state aid formula for additional assistance. The fiscal year 20 executive budget continues to implement the executive's plan to restore additional assistance by providing $68 million for the second installment of funding. Additionally, the executive makes good on the promise to raise teacher pay by 20% by school year 2020. A total investment of $646 million in Arizona's teachers. The fiscal year 20 budget includes an additional $165 million for teacher salaries in the baseline, which means this funding is permanent and will be adjusted for inflation annually. At full implementation, the cumulative impact of these initiatives is over $1 billion additional dollars in permanent spending for education. Results-based funding was introduced in fiscal year 2018 to reward schools for high student achievement and to incentivize the expansion and replication of high-performing schools. In fiscal years 18 and 19, results-based funding was distributed to schools that scored in the top 10% of the statewide assessment AZ Merit. As you can see on the graph, results-based funding provided $39.2 million to 298 schools in fiscal year 18 and $38.3 to 285 schools in fiscal year 19. In fiscal year 20, the executive will use the A through F letter grade system instead of AZ Merit to distribute results-based funding. Using the letter grade system will allow schools to be recognized for growth and readiness for success, in addition to proficiency on the statewide assessment. Schools that receive a letter grade A designation will qualify for results-based funding under the current formula. The executive also expands the funding formula to include B schools with 60% or higher free and reduced price lunch participation. The executive provides $60 million to support this expansion of results-based funding to 675 schools in fiscal year 20, totaling $98 million in additional financial support for schools. Governor Ducey released the Safe Arizona Schools Plan in March of last year, which called for making school safety a top priority by investing more in mental and behavioral health resources at schools, as well as increasing the number of school resource officers serving on school campuses. During the most recent grant cycle for SROs, 203 schools applied for officers, but only 114 received them due to limited funding availability. This executive budget provides $9 million to fund SROs for the remaining 89 schools. The executive budget also includes $6 million to establish a new school safety grant program that awards school counselors or social workers to public schools in a manner similar to school resource grant to the school resource officer grants. The fiscal year 2021 baseline will include an additional increase in funding to double the grant program and further expand access to these critical resources. School counselor caseloads will decrease by 17% as a result of this investment. The executive budget includes $10 million to establish a career and technical education incentive program to further align K-12 education with Arizona's workforce needs. Each year, the Arizona Commerce Authority will identify critical industry certificates. A $1,000 incentive payment per pupil will be provided to schools that graduate with students with these approved credentials. The State Board for Charter Schools grants charter status and oversees over 500 charter schools statewide. Over 17% of Arizona students attend charter schools, and enrollment continues to grow. The executive budget provides $786,000 for the State Board of Charter Schools to hire 10 additional staff members to conduct more frequent school site visits to address operational, academic, and financial performance issues. And now we'll turn the time over to Kwesi to address higher education.
So just a couple of more slides here. We know that as our schools begin to age, we receive more building renewal applications every year. And as you can see from your graph, the number of applications has tripled since 2013. And so on this graph here, school building renewal, if you see the gray line on your chart there, that shows the FY19 appropriation, which is at $51 million. And the orange line shows where we are in the current fiscal year. So we're quickly approaching that appropriated amount. So the executive budget puts $25 million into school building renewal to allow for a total of $76 million for school building renewal applications. And the executive budget also will return to the pre-2013 building construction standards. So there were a number of changes made after the recession that required schools to submit requests on a different year basis, I think every 2 years or so, instead of schools that were funded during every year. So the budget here will actually return to the pre-2013 levels for that. For higher education, the executive budget invests $21 million into the Arizona Teachers Academy. So in 2017, Governor Ducey, along with the 3 public universities, introduced the academy as a way to helping solve the Arizona shortage of teachers. And so this $21 million will do 4 things. It'll expand eligibility for students outside of the College of Education who are majoring in a STEM discipline. It will also provide 4 years of benefits. So at the moment, a student who attends one of the 3 universities is able to enter into the Teachers Academy for either 1 to 2 years, and they can receive 1 to 2 years of benefits. The 2020 budget makes it possible so that those students can receive 4 years of tuition benefits. So what that means is that if a student has a remaining balance after their institutional aid, gift aid, scholarships, other federal grants have been applied, we'll fill in that last dollar amount, and so up to 4 years. A $1,000 stipend will be awarded to students, juniors and seniors who agree to teach in a critical need area or critical need environment. So those would be STEM, special education, rural, low-income, tribal schools. Those areas have a particularly severe shortage of teachers, and so to incentivize those students to go and teach in one of those areas, we're going to provide them with a $1,000 stipend. And lastly, we provide the academy to other students. So our community colleges do a wonderful job at providing post-baccalaureate opportunities, and we also invite non-resident students to participate. So there are some targeted workforce investments within 3 particular counties. Pima County operates at Pima Community College one of 2 aviation technician training facilities. And because aerospace is very, a big industry down in the southern Arizona region, that facility is going to help boost the output of students who have those credentials and who can go and serve in those areas to fill the demands of the region. At Maricopa, we know that in the Phoenix metropolitan area, a few of these healthcare specialty areas are expected to grow by 24% on average, according to the Bureau for Labor Statistics. And so we provide $6 million to Maricopa County Community College District so that they can expand their specialty offerings to include telemetry, oncology, home care specialists, ICU nurses. And then lastly, I'm sure after the delays with the Lucid facility, everyone's proud to hear that that's coming to Casa Grande. With a partnership between the Arizona Commerce Authority, OEO, the City of Casa Grande, there will be a regional workforce training facility that's built, also a partnership with Central Arizona College, to help educate those advanced manufacturing students who will work at not only the Lucid facility, but other companies in the region who would like to train their employees there. So there's a $5 million investment in the budget to help that facility get off the ground. And then lastly, we invest $35 million into our public universities to help defray the cost of educating a resident student. We also include $30 million to hold the universities harmless from future increases in the state's health insurance trust fund. Without that, the students would end up bearing those costs. The schools take that money from tuition dollars, and so that they can put that money into something else, we fill that for them. And then until 2011, the state did operate a program for National Guard members, a tuition reimbursement program for them. In 2011, it was halted due to the recession. And so as Arizona, you can see, is the only state that does not have a National Guard tuition reimbursement program, the 2020 executive budget reinstates or appropriates $1 million for a program to allow them to get educational opportunities for promotion. And I'll turn it back over to Matt, who will introduce health and welfare and the rest of the presentation.
Thanks, Questy. Thanks, Carlos. We were really excited about the investment here in Pinal County for the workforce training center. I know I've heard from a number of people that John actually had mentioned. Where is John? John. Yes, John mentioned about not just Lucid and Nikola benefiting from this, but other manufacturing sectors and businesses that are just desperate for the skilled, trained workers that this facility will provide. And it really is kind of the best when we do investments on the state level, that it's not a state-centered program, it's a partnership with our local entities, including Casa Grande and the Central Arizona College. So moving on to health and welfare, we currently have a kids care program that provides health care to children whose parents fall below a certain income threshold. Current law requires us to freeze the program and not allow any new children who qualify to enter the program and receive benefits if the federal reimbursement rate drops below 100%. Right now, the feds pick up 100% of the cost of kids care. That's scheduled to occur, the drop is scheduled to occur in September of this year, to drop down to 90%. So they're still picking up 90% of the cost, but current law says that we have to freeze the program, which would result in about 6,000 children in Arizona being unable to access health care. That's a big problem in our view. And so that number would only grow to 27,000 or 26,000 in fiscal year 2022. So the governor's budget repeals that law so that we can protect health insurance for Arizona children. We also raised the child care subsidy for working parents and foster parents. This really serves 2 purposes. It's a workforce program so that parents can stay on the job knowing that their children are receiving quality child care and early education opportunities and remain safe. And it's also an early childhood education initiative so that children at a young age can be getting lessons and high quality instruction so that their development in kindergarten and beyond is accelerated. So we're including $56 million. We've received the federal funding for this program, so it will not have a general fund impact. And we're modernizing the rate for that. So bringing the new Arizona rate, the max rate that we can provide, above many of our other states. We're addressing our adult protective services. This is a division within the Department of Economic Security that investigates cases of abuse and neglect of seniors or other vulnerable adults. That caseload has continued to climb, as evidenced in the red line there, and we're providing enough funding to meet that caseload. You can also see the home and community-based services. That's for Maricopa County. It's about at 1,700 as of fiscal year 2017. The statewide number is 3,000. 3,000 Arizonans are waiting to get home and community-based services. These are the Meals on Wheels programs, adult daycare, nursing visits, to help seniors remain as independent as possible for a longer period of time. And so we moved to lower that backlog, that wait list that has occurred when the Great Recession happened. We're including $1 million to establish a new prenatal telemedicine grant program for our rural providers. We know that there are many counties in Arizona that don't have the adequate equipment to provide health care services to expectant mothers. And as a result, they have to travel to urban areas. So we provide a grant program for providers to receive that telemedicine equipment. And in 2021 and 2022, we set up a loan repayment program for providers who agree to go into our rural communities and work. We provide $1 million to help augment our suicide prevention efforts for veterans. Our percentage of veteran suicides, of the total suicides in Arizona, that percentage is higher than the national average. Now, while we recognize we probably have a greater share of veterans in Arizona, we're still higher than the national average. And that's a problem, and it resulted in the state qualifying for a grant to address it, and that created the Be Connected program. This is a 24/7 hotline to assist veterans, provide them the resources that they need in order to get through the mental health challenges that they might be facing. Our natural resources, the chief component of that's the Waterdale, the drought contingency plan, $30 million in conservation funding. The idea behind it is we're going to pay people who are legally entitled to Colorado River water to keep that water in Lake Mead. The blue curve represents the current projection of Lake Mead elevation. It's likely to approach 1,000 feet by 2027. Once you go below 1,000, you enter this category called dead pool, which means that the water cannot get through Hoover Dam, which not only affects hydroelectricity production for the Southwest, but it certainly affects the Colorado River system. So 7 lower basin states have rallied around this agreement, plus the federal government and Mexico, to help preserve Lake Mead's elevation. We're hoping to see that ratified by the Arizona legislature on Thursday. The $5 million I mentioned in agriculture infrastructure, we're including that too. Public safety, and this is a major initiative for Pinal County, but we're including $74 million for a salary package, which the vast majority is going to the Department of Corrections and the Department of Public Safety. We're including some other public safety oriented agencies that have AZ Post certified officials. And then we're including the Department of Child Safety and our caseworkers for a pay raise, as well as the Department of Health Services at our state hospital. And this just really synthesizes the problem we're seeing in our prisons, the vacancy rate. The unfilled positions for our correctional officers is approaching dangerously high levels. We're right now at nearly 15% of the positions we have are unfilled. It was only 1% in 2011. And that results in our existing COs working more hours. There is a lot of strain on the system. And again, it really does create a dangerous environment in our prisons, and we're working to address that. So we're including a 10% pay raise in year 1 and a projected 5% raise in year 2. $22 million for a DPS pay package that includes a 10% raise for our troopers. We know that we can't compete with at least our 5 largest competitors. You can see where the DPS entry starting salary is, and so this will help boost our recruitment. Reducing turnover at the Department of Juvenile Corrections. We had 100% turnover in our entry-level youth correctional officers last year. These are folks that are doing rehabilitation work, and that just cannot happen when you have a different YCO every week trying to learn the ropes and help these kids. So we're including a 15% pay raise for them. A 9% pay raise for our Department of Child Safety workers. We've had this legislative benchmark of hiring 1,400 caseworkers, and we've been unable to reach that benchmark for the last several years. Pay is an issue, and we're hoping that this will help augment those efforts. These are other recidivism-related positions within our Department of Corrections. Substance abuse counselors, right now half of the positions are vacant. And we know that the vast majority of those in prison need substance abuse treatment that we can't provide to them right now when we have these vacancies. We also have 25% vacancy rates for our teachers in the educational services. Again, another issue that we need to address with a pay raise. And this is another example. 2,000 inmates have gone through our Second Chance Center. This is an employment center that provides workforce training skills so that inmates, when they leave, are ready to get to work and be productive members of our society. We're expanding that to include 21st century job training and coding for in the IT sector. So we're excited about that. We're including $12 million for other public safety investments, more troopers, and an increased vehicle replacement budget. This is the public safety fee. We just wanted to put it in there to show how it's calculated. You look at the highway patrol budget, you divide it by the number of vehicles that we project would be paying the public safety fee, and that's how you get the $32. But we also are making significant investments in public safety with the pay raises and the new troopers and the vehicle replacement. All of those things would normally increase the public safety fee, but we have an interest in holding the line and ensuring that it doesn't go beyond 32. So this chart is more technical in nature, but it basically says that we're including general fund money to front load the public safety investments. And as the natural growth in public safety fee eligible transactions occur, that is, people move here, they bring in a car, they'll need to register, they'll need to pay the public safety fee, or those who are not old enough to drive come of age and they get a car and they have to register it, and that triggers a public safety fee. So there's a natural growth in public safety fee revenue that we're projecting, and that will offset gradually over time our state support. So we can make public safety investments right now while holding the public safety fee constant and not allowing it to go above $32, which is a key interest of the governor. So at the end of the day, as you can see in the 2020 column, we had an enacted base spending for 2019 of about $10.38 billion. We're adding $461 million in baseline spending, including the teacher pay raise package. We also are including $538 million in new executive initiatives. So it's a total spending growth rate of 9.2%, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, or about $1 billion, of which a majority is one time in those strategic targeted investments to preserve our fiscal flexibility in the out years. So that leaves us with a total spending package of $11.36 billion, with a $542 million rainy day deposit, and we end with a positive $109 million, while maintaining over $200 million in structural balance. So we're really proud about that. We're able to make the investments that we know that matter to Arizonans: public safety, child safety, education above and beyond inflation, while preserving Arizona's fiscal future moving forward. I want to thank certainly Carlos and Kwesi, for my staff, and for Trista coming along with us to share the good news that we have in the budget. Becky for helping coordinate and organize, and certainly the City of Casa Grande for hosting us here in the chambers. The budget's available online, azgovernor.gov, as well as our agency website at azospb.gov. And with that, I'm available to take questions or comments, and we'll be recording these things to take back to Phoenix as we move forward. Just as an FYI, right now, the next step in the process is we've unveiled the budget. The legislature has it. They're trying to understand it. They've asked us a lot of questions about what we have in it, and that's fair. It's $11.3 billion. You expect to get some questions about it. And then they will come up with their own idea of what the state budget should look like, and then we go back and forth and negotiate on their interests and our priorities, and ultimately it should result in a good package that benefits all of Arizona, and hopefully sometime in April or May. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Go ahead.
With the federal tax cut, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, dear. With the federal tax cut that came in 2018, there's a little back and forth between the governor and the legislature as far as what will happen for the adjustment on that. Do you know what the timing is on that? Because a lot of people may delay filing so that they don't have to do an amended return.
Is anyone, how many are you familiar with the concept of tax conformity? All right. So for those of you who don't know, Arizona uses, in order to make everything convenient for taxpayers, they use the federal adjusted gross income number that, that you file on your federal taxes as the starting point for calculating your tax liability here in Arizona. We've issued tax forms that have been custom. We've always conformed, so we've operated under that principle for tax year 2018. As a result of President Trump's tax reform, the FAGI, the federally adjusted gross income level, has increased because it's increased to pay for some of the other rate reductions in other areas of the federal tax code. Since we conform and we use that FAGI, that means that your starting point in calculating Arizona tax liability has gone up as well. There is a bill in the legislature to offset that increase by lowering overall tax rates by, I believe, Senator Mesnard has introduced a bill to lower tax rates by 0.11. Our calculation has suggested that the average benefit to an Arizona taxpayer would be between $1 and $11 with that plan. So the challenge is we don't really know how much more revenue we would collect by using a higher FAGI. So it's problematic for us to say, let's make it revenue neutral when we don't know how much revenue is coming in. So the governor's proposal is to say, let's conform, provide certainty to Arizona taxpayers, adopt President Trump's tax plan for Arizona, and wait and see what happens. If there is an overage, he would like to see that overage not spent, but put into the state's rainy day fund. And we can come back next year and take a look at what kind of tax package we can do. But it's premature in our view to cut taxes when we don't know how much revenue we would bring in as a result of conformity. And we believe that's the most fiscally prudent approach to take at this time. So in terms of timing, I know that there are bills that do not reflect what the governor wants that are moving forward, and I think that's going to create opportunities for conversations in the coming weeks with the legislature.
I have two questions. One, there's some legislation that's going to be dropped to repeal the $32 fee on the registration increase that's supposed to help, refund our HERF, or at least leave the money in the HERF fund. And so my question is, what's the prognosis for that to pass? And then the other question is another kind of a tax question, but there's also legislation that's been dropped on a gas tax increase that will raise the gas tax 25 cents over the next 3 years to increase the HERF funds by about $1 billion a year for the state. And what's the governor's position on both of those, actually?
So I would have to refer you to our legislative team. I can't really speak on behalf of the governor related to those two issues. I would observe that the governor has said publicly, related to the public safety fee, that its repeal is not a priority of his. I would also observe that while the HERF money might be protected with that bill, what it essentially does is right now the public safety fee funds the highway patrol. This bill would say, instead of using public safety fee monies, we're going to use the general fund, which is what we've always done in the past, except that when we have a general fund shortfall, we always return back to HERF, because the Highway Patrol is the only constitutionally eligible state agency to use HERF besides the cities, counties, and the State Department of Transportation. So this would not protect the HERF from being swept in the future. The public safety fee currently would protect that, because you can't use any HERF money on things besides transportation right now, right? Because the Highway Patrol has their own dedicated funding stream. So, but as far as that bill going forward, I know that, again, the governor said it's not a priority of his to repeal it. It's our interest to hold it at least steady, to keep it from going up anymore. And it could actually drop based on the projections of public safety fee transactions.
Man, want to thank you for being here. I'm Anthony Smith, Pinal County Supervisor, and the governor for this outreach. This is very important, and thank you for doing that. I wanted to first thank the governor and others for, in their budget, eliminating the recession area tax sweeps, or not tax sweeps, cost sweeps that hit the counties and the cities very hard, and we appreciate that the budget contains some of the last remnants of that, and that is, we're going to see the end of those cost shifts, hopefully, for some time. But we also want to look at additional ways in which we can get revenue. The counties, cities always are looking for ways of getting additional revenue. I personally support the increase in the gas tax. One of the reasons is because just a couple of years ago, we put it before the voters on a regional transportation authority, the creation of that, and a half-cent increase in sales tax. And counties and cities oftentimes feel alone because the transportation isn't adequately funded at the state or the federal level. So we sometimes have to go with taking the risk and sometimes the abuse from the voters as far as putting that out there. So I think the gas tax, since it's not been increased since the 1990s, is a good, it's not a cure-all for transportation. It hits those which are the gas, and I understand maybe some of the other alternative fuels, but we need to find a way to adequately fund transportation and its growth and increase the safety of our roads. Another revenue producing is, I'm hoping the legislature and the governor looks at the results of the Wayfair decision and internet sales. I know it's been estimated that it's less than 10%, maybe 3 to 5, 8% as far as revenue, but that can be a big number. And it's looking towards the future, and I believe internet purchases and that whole world of retailing will continue to expand, and I think now figure out why we can do that and take advantage of it. Budget-wise, I really very much appreciate the Workforce Training Center putting money in the budget, and that'll come, because for Pinal County and our area communities, that is probably the single greatest challenge, is being able to provide adequate training and supply of the workforce going forward. We're very attractive to a lot of these corporations looking to move here in Pinal County and in our area communities, but we need to deliver on a qualified workforce. Just a little item, it's one in which my organization, County Supervisors Association, is looking at the presidential preference election in 2020. There's the governor budget has about 4.4. The JLBC has 5.7. County Supervisors Association says neither one of those numbers actually adequately fund and reimburse for the elections that the counties oftentimes fund. So that, look at that number in the budget, it's, and that we would get complete reimbursement for especially the 2020 presidential preference election. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for those comments.
Yeah, I'm actually opposed to the gas tax, and the reason I say that is because there's already a public safety fee for the state patrol, because my understanding is their budget was rated for road maintenance as it is. So now you want to add gas tax on top of that. I think we got to be able to figure out, you know, with the revenue we already have, how to maintain the roads. And the other comment about the gas tax is that with hybrid cars and electric cars, you've got vehicles on the road that are wearing the roads, and yet they're not going to pay that tax. So I think that's unfair.
They're included in that bill.
There is a provision in there.
How does that work, though? How do they pay?
Charging stations and that.
By mileage? Well, how do you track mileage of somebody driving a hybrid car?
The charging stations, there'll be charges in that. I know it's covered, I don't know the exact details, but it's being addressed.
But you could plug it in your own house, right?
But they're not using, okay, it's a user fee. I'm just saying it's there, I can't take.
Well,
Registration, if the paper was read this morning, there's a registration fee, there's a charge and a registration for hybrids, unless you an increase over.
well, all right, I'd have to see if that was equivalent, though, if they're paying an equivalent rate.
I think that's the intent. The intent is that it will be, they're not gonna get a free ride. The intent is that it will be.
All right. And then my other comment is you've got all this money for I-17, like $85 million to widen it for like 22 miles, and yet we've got I-10 here from Casa Grande to Phoenix. That's about 22 miles of 4 lanes, and the congestion's terrible, a lot of truck traffic there. And the last I heard was there's almost no chance of starting a project on that for like 9 or 10 years, based on, you know, the reservation, dealing with, you know, working with them, and also, I guess, you know, environmental impact studies and that kind of thing. I mean, what can be done to get that accelerated? I really want to see some action on that, and I think everybody else does as well.
And as to echo the mayor, I mean, we're trying to, they're tough negotiations. You know, when we had to prioritize where to put, you know, the excess state highway fund revenue as a result of having HERF restored, we had to look at shovel-ready projects. And I-17 is further along than I-10. That's not to say that I-10 is an incredibly important investment, an infrastructure investment to make. You know, I ran into, on my way up on my way down from Phoenix, you know, I ran into the same congestion problems. It's the safety is a major deal given the level of traffic. So we're hoping, if the HERF restoration is preserved, to then target monies to I-10 once that project is further along. But there are a number of hurdles that need to be engineering studies, environmental studies, working with the tribes to get agreement on how to move forward. But it is a top priority of the Department of Transportation. They've been keeping us in the loop on that. And you know, we're working with the feds on trying to get help in this area as well. We're trying to get everybody on board to move it along. So it certainly is a top priority. I would imagine that it would be next in line after I-17. Once it's $130 million over 3 years for the I-17 expansion. I would almost believe that I-10 would be teed up for something, certainly by that time. But it's a very valid point.
And what about I-11? I know there was talk about that, and maybe that would be a bypass route for some of the trucks that would, in addition or in lieu of widening I-10. Where's the progress on that?
I'm not familiar with the update on that project, so I would need to check on that. So if I can get your card after, I can follow up with you.
Hi there, my name is Stacy Seaman, and I'm with the Black Box Foundation. And I'm here today with some other folks from the arts community in Pinal County. And I have a comment and then also a question. As you know, the arts are currently in this portion of the budget that's been presented not funded. And I know that it's been typical over the last few years that there's been funding for the arts that has been found after the initial budget presentation, which is wonderful, and of course, we're very grateful for that. But given that the Arizona Arts Commission has commissioned studies, and in their latest cultural data project, they've found that the arts in Arizona generates $581 million to the local economies, and that for every dollar that's spent in the arts, $92 is returned back to the communities. It's interesting that it continues not to have a dedicated funding stream. Just in Pinal County alone, over the last 5 years, $50,000 has been granted to local arts organizations, including the Black Box, including the Casa, Grande Arts and Humanities Commission, and the Creative Communities Institute. Now, if you give that $92 of that, or for every dollar that's spent, 92 is returned to the community, that can be estimated that $450,000 is returned to Pinal County for that investment of the arts. So my question is that even though we do anticipate, of course, it will be funded again from the Rainy Day Fund, is there a possibility of finding a dedicated funding source for the arts?
There always is a possibility.
Yay, always hope.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We've used the interest off of the Rainy Day Fund to cover some of the costs for the arts budget, and it somehow finds, we find a way to make it work. Is it the most ideal solution in providing certainty to the Arts Commission? No. But budgeting is imperfect, and it's it's something that I'm sure will be discussed. I've received a number of letters from across the state about how important this issue is, so it's something that we're taking under advisement.
Thank you. Yes, sorry. And if you are here today, we did put a call out. If you are here today specifically to support the arts, if I could just see a show of hands. Sorry, I forgot. I told everybody I'd let them raise their hands. Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh.
Yes, Matt, thank you again for being here. Gilbert Lopez, City of Coolidge Economic Development. We just want to thank the governor for his commitment to the ACA, the Competes Fund, and also, of course, the workforce development. It's critical to attracting companies like Lucid and Nikola and Coolidge in our region. So we really need those funds to compete with Texas and some of the other states. So thank you for that.
Any other comments or questions? And we'll be here after the event if you want to chat with us some more. If you want business cards, we can continue dialogue. Thanks again for taking time out to visit with us and learn more about the executive budget and things that you like. Please let your legislators know, because that makes a huge difference in budget negotiations. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.